Chapter 15. "He's trying to kill us," I gasped. Bits of frost coated my words as they left my mouth. "Cold air is good for us," Kyle said. "Maybe if we were TV dinners." I couldn't believe Mr. Cravuto was still dragging the class outside. Doesn't he own a calendar? Or a thermometer? I wasn't the only one complaining. Nearly everyone tried to point out to Mr. Cravuto that the weather had turned slightly brisk. He didn't care. He stood there and shouted, "Suck it up, babies! Make your own heat! Come on, hustle!" I wondered what it felt like to have sweat freeze on your face. I had a sinking suspicion I was going to find out. All I could think about was those Jack London stories where people were stuck in the Yukon wilderness as the temperature plunged to 40 below zero. I really didn't want my toes to break off. Or my nose. If that made me a big baby, I could live with it. Mom and Dad spent most of the weekend shopping for a mobile to hang over the crib. They hadn't bought a crib yet, but the logic and order of their purchases was just another of the many mysteries of birth. Monday, after school, I went to my first student council meeting. All we did was talk about ways to improve school spirit. I tried to suggest some ideas, but the older kids completely ignored the freshmen. This did little for our spirit. Tuesday, life took an unusual twist. Everyone has something he checks out. Dad's interested in cars. Mom notices babies. Ever since Kyle got a Rolex watch from his rich grandfather last year, he's always looking at people's wrists. Patrick knows every brand and style of sneaker. The way he walks around gazing at feet, he's going to end up with a bent neck. As for me, if I see anyone carrying a book, I try to spot the title and author. It's always nice when someone's reading something you like. Though half the time I look at books now, I end up staring at whatever junk Mouth just reviewed. On the way out of homeroom, I noticed that Lee was carrying a paperback. I didn't recognize it. I sped up and glanced at the book as I went by, figuring I could do it without her noticing. I'd expected something really dark, like Anne Rice or H.P. Lovecraft. Instead, peeking out at me from the front cover, I saw the name S. Morgenstern. I was so surprised I stopped walking. I guess she noticed I was staring, which she should be pretty used to, what with the pins in her face, the green hair, the 8 pounds of mascara, the weird shirts and all. I didn't want her to think I was staring at her face or clothes or anything, so I pointed to the book and said, "Morgenstern." One of the best books ever is The Princess Bride. It's by William Goldman. The cool thing is, the book itself is supposed to be about a book that Goldman read when he was a kid. So Goldman made up this author, S. Morgenstern. As far as I knew, the only book written by S. Morgenstern was The Princess Bride. It's always great to find out that a favorite author has a book you didn't know about. It's like thinking you finished your soda, but then you grab the can and there's still some left. Only it's 1,000 times better. She held up the cover. The Silent Gondoliers, a fable by S. Morgenstern. "You like Goldman?" I nodded. Now that we were face to face, I really didn't want to start a conversation. Ick, I think she'd just gotten another ring in her nose. Not that I kept count. If civilization ever broke down, she could probably survive for months by bartering all that metal for food. "You like The Princess Bride?" she asked. I shrugged. "Ah, I see you're the strong, silent type." While I was trying to think of something to say, or some way to avoid saying anything, she tucked the book under her arm and headed down the hall. On the back of her shirt, in a sea of black, a yellow pair of Cheshire cat eyes, hovering above a smug smile, stared at me. Later that afternoon, between 6th and 7th period, she glanced toward me as we passed in the hall. I sort of nodded out of reflex, but I hurried away. I didn't want her to start talking to me. She was just too weird. November 7th. It's weird. I've known Julia since I was little, but we drifted in different directions. When we pass each other in the hall, she never even looks at me. I've sort of nodded at her a couple of times, but they were the small nods a guy uses when he isn't sure he's going to get anything in return. What would have happened if we'd stayed friends? Would she have dumped me when she turned gorgeous? I'd like to think not, but I have no idea. I guess I really don't know anything about her except that she's beautiful and smart. Does that make me shallow? I don't care. I want her to notice me. I want her to like me and laugh at my jokes and walk down the street holding my hand. I hope I figure some of this stuff out. Not just for your sake, Smelly. For mine, too. Oh, great. It just hit me. You're going to be exactly like Bobby, with girls following you all around and everything. I'll get to watch it all again. No, I'm not going to wimp out. We've read all these poems in English about guys who worship someone from afar and never spoke up. No way that's happening to me. Tomorrow morning, I'm going to say hi to Julia. That's all. I'll just walk up to her at the bus stop and say hi. There's no reason not to. If music hath charms to soothe the savage breast, then why are there so many hyperactive geeks in the band? I'd caught a ride to the game with them again. It wasn't bad, until the bus broke down on the way back. They all took out their instruments and started playing Sousa marches while we waited for the school to send another bus. I expected them to start thrusting woodwinds at me and screaming, "Join us!" The marches didn't lift my spirits. I was still angry with myself for not saying hi to Julia that morning. I'd almost done it, but then I'd lost my nerve. I still couldn't understand how Mouth could walk up to anyone in the world and just start talking. The whole day was pretty much a disaster, until I started working on my article. That was fun. I borrowed an idea from English class. Last week we'd read this story called The Waltz by Dorothy Parker. Mr. Franca told us a lot about her. She was a master of sarcasm. Someone once asked her, "Do you mind if I smoke?" She replied, "I don't care if you burn." In The Waltz, the reader hears what this woman is thinking and then what she's saying. Nothing else. She's talking to this guy who asked her to dance. Everything she says is polite, but then you find out what she thinks. And what she thinks is far from nice. It's a brilliant story. Reading something like that for the first time is an amazing experience. Dorothy Parker also wrote book reviews. I should be so lucky. Saturday, I went to the garage for advice. Dad was under the vet, so I had a conversation with his legs. How long did it take before you finally talked to Mom? A couple of months. How come it took so long? I didn't want to say the wrong thing. So what'd you say to her? Hi. That's it? Just hi? Sure. It's about the easiest thing there is to say, especially when you're nervous. Besides, it worked, didn't it? Monday morning, I decided it was time for that act of bravery. Julia was already at the bus stop. I figure I'd flash her the Hudson smile and say, "Hi, Julia," then walk past. That's all. Smile and say hi. It was a start. This time, my courage held. I moved toward her. Oh God, she was beautiful. I opened my mouth and made sounds. The syllables shifted across several broken octaves, creating a noise that was somewhere between the creak of an ancient door hinge and the gasp an asthmatic kid makes when he gets punched in the gut. My voice was changing. Julia glanced toward me, frowning as if she was trying to make sense out of the noise. I forced my gaze straight ahead and sped past, praying she didn't realize the pathetic purpose of my croaking. Even you can't think this is a good idea. I stood next to Kyle, shivering. It's just flurries, he said. No big deal. Suck it up, babies, Mr. Cravuto shouted. There had to be some sort of state law against this. He got to stand around in a sweatsuit and a jacket, with his hands in his pockets, while we shivered and tried to make our own heat. On the other hand, if I froze to death, I wouldn't have to run my failed conversation with Julia through my mind another 6 million times. After calisthenics, we played touch football. Now I knew why they called it a huddle. We all huddled together for warmth. Well, as much as guys can huddle. This is crazy, I said when we headed into the locker room. Kyle stared at me. Hey, your voice is changing. I noticed. Tuesday was Patrick's last day. I'll come over for a while, I told him when we were heading toward our buses. He shook his head. Everything's packed. We're leaving as soon as I get home. So, you're gone? Yeah, I guess I'm gone. Across the lot, my bus was almost loaded. I knew the shouter wouldn't wait for me. "We'll keep in touch," I said as I dashed off. "Right," Patrick waved. "I'll email you when we get unpacked." As I got on the bus, I realized I might never see him again.